Ladies and gentlemen, we got a decent amount to get into here. Obviously, we have the NFL Combine dramatically changing the value of these picks. I think a lot of people are making the argument they're worth less. We have Daniel Jones signing a massive extension. We have so many players getting hit with the franchise tag. We have Derek Carr over in New Orleans. So we have a lot of trades to look at. We may or may not have a ton of rookie picks, a Daniel Jones trade or two. But before we get into it, you better be dropping a like on this video. You better be subscribed to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And of course, if you want to get in our free fantasy football group chat, you can find the link in the description and in the comment section. Like almost 10,000 people in that fantasy football group chat, so make sure you're taking advantage. But I think that should be about it. Let's pull up our first trade here. I've not really looked at too many of these, but we are going to be looking at a Rashad Bateman deal on this front, where it's Bateman versus 2 second-round picks, and you're getting the 302. Now, if we're going to be looking at the difference between that 207 and 302, well, yeah, I mean, definitely exists. It is going to be marginal. If we're looking at historical hit rates from a rookie that you're going to be getting in the middle of the second round, probably hovering around 20%, whereas maybe the hit rate with that early third is going to be around 13, 14%. Now, I may or may not be pulling these numbers out of my butt. I haven't looked at it in quite some time, but we are in the same range there. So I don't want to make an assumption that those are two assets we really need to be baking this trade too much. If we're going to be looking at Rashad Bateman versus the 2024 second, I personally would prefer Rashad Bateman on that front. I don't want to act like it's the easiest trade in the world. Like if it was Bateman versus 2024 first, you definitely give me the first round pick. So I think it's a very fair trade if I'm going to be honest with you. You probably take Bateman, but in reality, if you're not a big Bateman fan, I'm not going to fault you for not wanting to go in that direction. And now our next trade is going to be an Aaron Jones versus 206 deal. And here, if we're going to be looking at Aaron Jones, he is such an interesting and unique player, and that half the teams in your league will have no interest. Probably more than half the teams in your league, because if you're trading for Aaron Jones, what you need to find is you need to find a team that is ready to contend right now. There'll never be anybody that's considering themselves a rebuilding roster that's going out of their way to acquire Aaron Jones. So not only do you have to find a contender, but at the same time, you need to find a contender that also needs a running back and is interested in Aaron Jones. So at this time of the offseason, you always have a very difficult time finding a suitor for an old veteran running back to trade away. The 206 seems a little light, but like I said, the trade market's not really there for Aaron. So I'd also say pretty fair deal. I don't want to talk about that one too much. But now going over to a Joe Burrow trade. This is the first one I can have a very strong opinion on. This is going to be a 12-team Superflex league where someone's trading away the 103, 108, and 203 for Joe Burrow. Don't overthink it. If you're looking at the landscape of Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues right now, if you're able to acquire one of those top 6 quarterbacks in Superflex, it is very difficult to overpay for that player, especially if you're only having to give up, say, at the 103, CJ Stroud, at the 108, maybe Zach Charbonnet, and then at the 203, maybe Michael Mayer. Like, if we're replacing those picks with the names of the players that will be selected, in my mind, it's going to be Joe Burrow, and not even remotely close, especially with how you can build your team around him. But now let's go over to a very interesting deal. This is going to be a Daniel Jones trade post-extension. Keep in mind, Daniel Jones just got paid, in my mind, maybe way too much money from the Giants, but also I think the Saints probably overpaid for Derek Carr. Probably think that the Seahawks overpaid for Geno Smith, so who the hell cares what my opinion is? If we're going to be looking at this, Daniel Jones and the 103 versus Jared Goff, Deebo Samuel, and a future second. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to waste any time here. Give me Daniel Jones over Jared Goff in the second round pick easily. Daniel Jones has rushing upside. Jared Goff has none. Daniel Jones has long-term job security. Jared Goff has none. And if we're looking at the 103 versus Deebo Samuel, while yes, Deebo Samuel was only drafted in 2019, stayed 5 years at South Carolina, so he's actually an older veteran wide receiver. I personally think Trey Lance will be the guy in San Fran this next season. If that's going to be the case, hell, at the end of the day, you may find yourself in a position where Deebo Samuel's in a low volume passing attack. Give me the 103 there. Let's go with the Daniel Jones side. Now, next trade, super simple as well. James Conner, 2 future first versus the 103 and 2 future thirds. Now, I am never of the opinion that you should just be taking your first round pick in this year's rookie draft and then selling it for next year's future first. People tell you to do that every single offseason. Last year, you had people coming out and saying, well, Mason, this class is horrible. Mason, you're an idiot. You need to take your 106. You need to take your 107 and sell it for a 2023 first round pick. Those picks next year are going to be so much better. Instead, I sat still. I took Chris Olave at the 106. And now we're having to see people go through and debate if they're going to take Jordan Addison or Zach Charbonnet. Don't overthink it. The grass is not always greener on the other side. Every offseason, people always say next year's class is better than this year's. It's happened pretty much every single season other than 2017 and 2020. People knew those classes were very good at the time. But if we're going to be looking at this, I will definitely take the 2 future first over the 103. I mean, hell, I would rather have the 103 over a random 2024 first. But if you're getting 2 of those picks, I'm not going to have to overthink it too much, especially knowing the optionality and the flexibility you'll have this summer to be able to make plays with those 2024 first. Love the idea of accumulating them when you're getting them at a discount, which I perceive this to be a pretty good price. And then I'd definitely rather have James Conner over 2 third-round picks. Even if I was a rebuilding roster, I probably would be trying to sell James Conner for a little bit more there. Now, let's go over to our next trade. This one's going to be a hefty one. We're looking at a 2024 first, the 102, the 103, and 202 versus A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Kenneth Walker. Now, I completely understand if you're a rebuilding team, you're saying, well, Mason, I don't really have the use for these veterans who are going to score points today. I need to instead focus in on long-term value. But I would make the argument that from a long-term value perspective, I'd probably rather have Kenneth Walker over the 102. I would probably rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown over the 103. And I know you can for sure get more in trade for A.J. Brown than a 2024 first and the 202. So even if you're a rebuilding roster, I feel like you should have probably squeezed out a little more value here. I'm definitely going to go with the 3 players. Now, swinging over to our next deal, we're going to be looking at Jamal Williams versus 2 thirds and Isaiah Spiller. At this point, Isaiah Spiller's barely worth the roster spot. I mean, don't overthink it here. Really, it's just going to come down to, are you a contender? Are you a rebuilder? Personally, I'm not a big Jamal Williams guy. I do think that we're going to see some serious regression this next year. There's an outside chance that Detroit invests into the running back position as well. But hell, if you're a Jamal Williams fan, I mean, it's not like you're overpaying here. You're paying 2 third-round picks. Now, we have another Bateman trade, which this one is going to be Rashad Bateman and the 208 versus the 107. Now, in my mind, I'm taking the 107 here. Assuming this is a 12-team Superflex league, you're going to have the option to take either a quarterback that could potentially fall, maybe someone like Will Levis, or maybe the wide receiver 1 in Jackson Smith-Njigba, or maybe the running back 2 in Jahmyr Gibbs, all of whom I would rather have leaps and bounds ahead of Rashad Bateman. And the 208's not bridging the gap here for me. Please give me the 107. This one's a much easier trade to evaluate than what we had with the Bateman deal early on. Now, this next one is going to be a hefty one because we have 3 teams to look at. And if I'm breaking down a 3-team trade, I'm just going to go team by team here. The first team getting Calvin Ridley, the 102, and a future third for DK Metcalf and the 208. Okay, in my mind, give me the 102 over DK Metcalf. Really like Metcalf, but that 102 gives you so much flexibility, and you can go out there and you can get Bryce Young. You can go out there and you can flip it for a different package. And yeah, I would much prefer having Calvin Ridley over the 208. So first side, definitely Calvin Ridley, 102. Don't have to overthink that one. Next trade, going to be involving DK Metcalf as well. DK Metcalf and KJ Osborne versus a future third, which let's just remove Osborne and that 3rd-round pick, and a 2024 first and the 108. Now, personally, at this point in the offseason, give me the flexibility of having those 2 future firsts, and I'm going to be able to figure it out over the next few months and try to squeeze out as much value as I possibly can. So this is another deal where I probably take the opposite side of Calvin Ridley. Give me the 108, give me the 2024 first, and then the very bottom end here, you are seeing a team trade away Calvin Ridley, the 102, and KJ Osborne versus the 108, a future first, and 208. So if I'm looking at that 2024 first-round pick versus Calvin Ridley, I'm definitely going to prefer the first-round pick. Okay, I love Calvin Ridley, but still at this point of his career, he's older. You have some question marks. So I don't really see too many people advocating for Calvin Ridley over that first round pick. But at the same time, in my mind, the level of player that you're going to be getting from the 108 to 102 range is so drastic that it almost swings me to the 102 and Calvin Ridley side of things. So I'd probably go Calvin Ridley 102 here. Don't really care too much about Osborne or the 208. That one, in my mind, is probably the fairest of them all. Now, going over to our next deal, we're going to be looking at Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert. So as of now, you're getting a Los Angeles Chargers tag for Stafford, Kenneth Walker, and the 102. Now, keep in mind, Superflex, in my mind, Justin Herbert's going to be a top 5 asset in Dynasty. In my mind, very difficult to replace. If we're looking at Matthew Stafford versus Keenan Allen, probably give me Stafford in a Superflex league. I'm not all out on Stafford. I think he's still going to have a few years left. But Justin Herbert versus Kenneth Walker in the 102, we can kind of replace this with Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, whoever the hell you're wanting. Personally, it's going to be difficult for me to decide on that front. I probably stick it with the best player available in Justin Herbert, but honestly, it's going to be up to you, and I'm not going to fault you with that, whatever direction you want to go. Now, our next one, Tyler Algier, the 103 versus the 106 and 2024 first. I'm going to go with the 106, 2024 first. The 103, 106, not too different for me, and I definitely would rather have a future first over Tyler Algier. Now, our next trade, we're going to be looking at a future first, 106 and 209 versus Jacobs, Najee Harris, and a 2024 second. If I'm looking at Najee Harris, I think he's going to be valued about equivalent to what you have with that 106. I mean, maybe you're going to be looking at a Jahmyr Gibbs there. I really do think it's going to be up to you. I probably would prefer Jahmyr Gibbs, but in reality, they're in the same ballpark. If we're looking at Josh Jacobs in a future second versus a future first and the 209, fair deal. I think it's going to be up to if you're a rebuilder or a contender. Now, our next one, 105 versus Dobbins and a couple second round picks that are all the way out in 2025. Give me the 105. I mean, with J.K. Dobbins, there's an outside chance that Baltimore decides to go out there and draft a very good running back in this year's NFL draft. At minimum, they're probably going to be adding the depth to that room. Now, our next trade, we're going to be looking at a couple of former Detroit Lions with Hawkinson, Jameson Williams, obviously still there, and a 2025 first versus the 105, 109. Jameson Williams versus the 109 is very interesting for me. I think that that's about where he should be valued. I know most people would rather have Jameson Williams over the 109, but in my mind, I think most people overrate him just a tad. I think that's fair. If I'm going to be looking at Hawkinson in the future first versus the 105, I'm going to be going with the Hawkinson side. But I'll say at the same time, if you're trading for a 2025 first, you better be very confident that your league is going to be around for a very long time. Now, our next trade, we have Hopkins, Kamara, Kupp, Aaron Jones for 3 future first. Kupp, probably worth a little less than the 105, right about the 105, coming off an injury, 30 years old. Kamara, definitely not worth the first. Hopkins, probably not worth the first. Obviously, this is a prototypical, are you a rebuilder? Are you a contender? But at the same time, I mean, it's an interesting spot in that, why are we having to make this trade in March, if that makes sense? Can we not look to hold on to our rookie picks just a little bit longer? See what we have available to us actually in our rookie draft, see how the NFL draft shakes out, and then possibly make the move then? But I think that's all I got for you. If you enjoyed this video, please go down there, drop a like, subscribe if you play Dynasty. And like I said, if you want to get in a free fantasy football group chat with myself and a ton of smart people, you can find the link in the comment section. You can find the link in the description. But thank you again. I appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day and really hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.